The bomber was already in the air when night fully closed around it. Clouds stretched in every direction, thick and unbroken. No moon, no ground lights, only darkness pressing against the cockpit windows. The engines droned steadily, a low mechanical rhythm that filled the aircraft. Inside, the crew worked in silence, each man focused on his position, each man listening for sounds that did not belong. The formation had been tight just minutes earlier. Red and green navigation lights had flickered on both sides. Other bombers had filled the sky, close enough to feel familiar. Then the clouds thickened. The lead aircraft vanished first. Its lights dissolved into the darkness. One by one, the others followed. The pilot held his heading. He trusted the instruments. He trusted the navigator's last calculation. But the radio crackled with static. No voices came through. The navigator leaned closer to his table. His map showed only a narrow corridor of estimated position. Wind drift had increased. Time no longer matched distance. The bomber continued forward. But the sky ahead felt empty. No silhouettes. No engine noise from nearby aircraft. No formation lights cutting through the dark. The tail gunner scanned behind them. Nothing but cloud and shadow. For the first time that night, the crew realized something was wrong. They were still flying. The engines were still running. The aircraft was intact. But the formation was gone, and in the darkness, they had no way to know where they were. The pilot adjusted the controls slightly, just enough to test the air, just enough to feel the weight of the aircraft respond. No one spoke. Outside, the clouds closed in again. The radio remained silent. The operator adjusted the frequency slowly. One channel, then another. Only static answered back. He tapped the headset. Listened again. Nothing. The navigator recalculated their position. He marked a new line across the map. Wind speed had shifted. Cloud cover had slowed them more than expected. Their estimated location drifted farther from the planned route. The pilot glanced at the instruments. Airspeed was steady. Altitude was holding. Fuel consumption looked normal. Everything said the aircraft was fine, but nothing confirmed where they were. The navigator spoke quietly, not to alarm anyone, just enough to be heard. Their margin for error was shrinking. The bombardier peered through the nose glass. There was no horizon, no stars, just layers of cloud sliding past. The crew waited for another aircraft to appear, a wingtip light, a shadow crossing the clouds, any sign they were not alone. None came. The radio operator tried again. He called the formation leader, then base, then any friendly call sign he could remember. Static filled the cabin. The pilot adjusted course by a single degree, a small correction, almost cautious. The navigator watched the compass carefully. Even small changes mattered now. Minutes passed. The engines continued their steady rhythm. But the silence grew heavier. They were flying blind. Not because the instruments failed, but because the sky had erased every reference point. The crew exchanged brief glances. No one said what they were thinking. Being lost was dangerous. Being lost at night was worse. Being lost alone was something else entirely. The pilot tightened his grip on the controls. They needed a decision, and soon. The clouds thinned without warning. One moment the bomber was sealed inside darkness. The next, the sky opened around them. Cold air pressed against the glass. Stars appeared in fragments. Far below, the ground was still invisible. The navigator lifted his head. For a brief second, he thought he saw movement. Then the pilot saw it too. A dark shape crossed the stars. Fast, deliberate. The tail gunner reacted first. He leaned into his sights. His voice cut through the intercom. "Aircraft, rear quarter." The pilot pushed the controls forward. The engines responded immediately. The bomber surged ahead, heavy, but moving. Another shadow slipped past the left wing. Then another. They were not alone anymore. The radio operator tried to call out. There was no time to wait for a reply. The first tracers streaked past the fuselage, bright lines tearing through the night. The bomber shook as evasive maneuvers began. Not sharp, not violent, just enough to throw off the aim. The top gunner opened fire. Short bursts, measured, controlled. The night filled with flashes. Gunfire lit the clouds in brief, violent pulses. The navigator forgot the map. He watched the sky instead, counting shapes, tracking movement. One enemy aircraft passed close, too close. Metal rattled along the wing, not a direct hit, but close enough to be felt. The pilot held the bomber steady. Too much movement would tear the formation apart. Except there was no formation anymore. The tail gunner fired again. Longer this time. His breathing was loud in the headset. One attacker broke away. Another replaced it. The bomber was still flying. Still intact. Still fighting. But the night was no longer empty, and the crew understood something clearly now. Getting lost had made them a target. The fighters did not rush the attack. They circled at a distance, watching, waiting for the bomber to slow, waiting for a mistake. Inside the aircraft, every movement felt heavier. The controls resisted each correction. The engines strained to maintain speed. The pilot checked the airspeed again. Too slow to outrun anything. Too fast to turn sharply in the dark. The navigator tried to regain orientation. He compared heading to time. Time to fuel. Fuel to distance. Nothing lined up cleanly. The radio operator called again. His voice was calm, almost routine. Still no reply. A burst of tracers flashed beneath the bomber. The aircraft jolted as shock waves passed close. The waist gunner braced himself. He adjusted his stance, locking his boots against the floor. His hands tightened on the grips. Another fighter slid into view on the right. Its engine glow flickered briefly, then vanished. The tail gunner tracked it carefully. He did not fire. Not yet. The pilot made a shallow turn, just enough to change the angle, not enough to stress the airframe. The fighters responded immediately. One climbed. The other dropped lower. They were coordinating. The bomber shuddered again as rounds struck the fuselage. Metal rang through the cabin. Something tore loose and disappeared into the darkness. Warning lights flickered, then stabilized. For now. The co-pilot called out engine temperatures. They were climbing. Fuel continued to drain. Slow. Unforgiving. The navigator swallowed before speaking. Their position was no longer an estimate. It was a guess. Another burst of fire crossed the tail. The gunner answered with a short burst. Controlled. Precise. One attacker broke off. The other stayed. The bomber pressed on. Alone in the night, still flying, still holding together. But the margin was almost gone. The pilot knew they could not keep this up for long. Fuel was dropping faster than planned. The engines were working harder than they should, and the fighters were still there. They had not committed. They were waiting. The navigator ran the numbers again, then stopped. There was no solution left on the map. Returning on the same heading risked flying straight back into enemy defenses. Continuing forward meant crossing unknown territory with no guidance. The pilot slowed his breathing. He steadied the controls. He asked for fuel status. The answer came quickly. Too low for indecision. The co-pilot watched the engine gauges. Temperatures were climbing. Oil pressure was beginning to fall. If they lost an engine now, they would not recover. The pilot made a choice. He adjusted the course slightly, not toward the planned route, not toward home, toward open darkness. The navigator looked up. He understood immediately. There was no safer direction, only less dangerous ones. The fighters shifted again. One dropped lower. The other climbed above the bomber's tail. The pilot did not react. He held the new heading. The engines roared unevenly as the aircraft responded. The bomber trembled, then steadied. Tracer fire flashed once more. This time, it passed wide. The tail gunner tracked the nearest fighter. His finger rested on the trigger. He waited. The fighters hesitated. They had expected panic, a sharp turn, a mistake. Instead, the bomber kept going. Minutes stretched. The darkness ahead remained empty. Slowly, the fighters began to fall back, not retreating, reconsidering. The bomber remained alone, still lost, still vulnerable. But moving. The pilot did not relax. Not yet. Survival would not come from speed or firepower. It would come from lasting longer than the threat. The night grew quieter. The fighters faded into the distance, their engine sounds swallowed by the dark. No final attack came. No sudden burst of gunfire. Only the steady, uneven rhythm of the bomber's engines remained. The pilot kept the aircraft on its new heading. Small corrections, gentle inputs. Anything more would risk losing control. Inside the cabin, the crew stayed alert. No one spoke unless necessary. The navigator folded his map part way, then stopped. There was no point pretending precision still mattered. Fuel levels continued to fall. Not dangerously fast, but fast enough to be noticed. The co-pilot tracked the engine gauges. Temperatures stabilized. Barely. The aircraft was no longer fighting. It was enduring. Clouds returned ahead, thick and layered. The bomber slipped into them without resistance. Visibility vanished again. But this time, the darkness felt protective. Minutes passed, then more. No tracers, no silhouettes, no radio calls. The radio operator listened anyway, headset pressed tight. Static never changed. The crew settled into a tense routine. Check instruments, scan the sky, listen. The bomber remained intact, damaged, lost, but holding together. Somewhere far away, other aircraft would be landing. Others would not. This crew did not know where they were. They did not know how long the fuel would last. They did not know what waited beyond the clouds. But for now, the aircraft was still flying. And for a bomber crew alone in the night, that was enough to keep going.